We're going to have a talk on Saint François de Laval, the first bishop of Canada and the US, 1623-1708. It is not an easy life to summarize in a short talk. It requires a lot of research, a lot of time, which I don't have. I remind you the purpose of these talks is to open a whole discovery of the great people who made our country. And they were great. They were great. And unfortunately, they're very little known, even in French Canada, more so in English-speaking Canada. I have distributed to you this little sheet of information on Saint François de Laval to help you focus on this man, also in line with what we have seen in the previous talks. So first of all, we have a timeline. I gave you here the whole length of Father Saint François de Laval's life, 1623, 1708. In 1623, the Recollets were in Ontario. They were here. Remember, Father Le Caron came in 1615. But it was really the beginning. 1624, a year after his birth, the country was consecrated to Saint Joseph, if you recall. 1624. 1639, when he was just 16 years old, Saint Mgr de Laval arrived in Quebec. By the way, he was born in France. It's in Normandy. 1642, Saint Jeanne Mance arrives in Montreal with Maisonneuve. So Montreal begins when our saint does not even have 20 years old. We have not yet spoken of Catherine of St. Augustine. She will play a role in the life of our bishop. We will see that a little bit more when we talk about her. I did not have time to go deeper beside mentioning her. We do have excellent books in Saint-Césaire about her. As you can see, she arrived in Quebec 1648, and she died in 1668. So she was actually there when Saint François de Laval arrived, and she was very close. Catherine of St. Augustine, I'm on the timeline, the very top. I'm speaking the very top. There's two, yes. Okay. Catherine of St. Augustine is, in a way, we could compare her to different saints. Marie l'Incarnation is a bit our St. Catherine of Siena here in Quebec. Catherine of St. Augustine is a very particular saint. She's not canonized yet. She's blessed. But St. Francis de Laval consulted her a lot. It's a bit like Mother Mariana in Quito. She is a direct battle with the devil. And it's an extraordinary life. We need to mention her because she was part of that time when Bishop de Laval arrived in Quebec and hell was loose. It was very tough. And so she was there. She was a young nun. She was very young. She was about, I think, 13 years old when she came to Quebec. So, and she fought with the devil directly. I mean, she was. Yes, well, if it's related to this.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
You said the devil was loose at that time. What do you mean?
Canada, if you recall now, the question is, hell was loose in Canada. If you recall Marie de l'Incarnation, if you go back to the story of Mary and the Incarnation, when she had this vision where she saw herself with another lady crossing the oceans, arriving in Canada, and she was greeted by this man who is the guardian of Canada. He said, "I'm the guardian of this land." And she walked a little hill, and there was a church, and Our Lady was sitting on top of the church with her child. And Our Lady was looking at this land of darkness, this land of, I forget the exact words, but where that was in the darkness of paganism, where the devil was controlling this country. And so Marie de l'Incarnation came in this land. She opened up. I mean, she was not the first one, but she's the first convent, definitely, 1639. So Catherine of St. Augustine came, and she literally, we will see that, she was possessed by permission of God. Demons came into her, in other words, to take them away from the people in Quebec. I mean, it was literally like that. Physically, they were in her. And it's a very strange story, but we do have her life story written by Father Ragueneau, who was a Jesuit living at that time, who was her spiritual director. And he wrote, she died in 68. He wrote her life in 71, 3 years later. So he was a first-hand witness. And we have that book in Saint-Césaire. We'll talk about that. I have spoken to you about Catherine of St. Augustine when we spoke about the Canadian martyrs. Do you remember? What do you remember of her and the Canadian martyrs? Well, to make it short, St. John of Brébeuf died in 49, and I think it was 61 or 62. He appeared to her, telling her that God wanted him to be her spiritual director. And so from heaven, he started appearing to her and guiding her, because he fought with the devil really deep in Huronia, in Ontario, near Midlands. But she fought with them right there in Quebec. Okay, but so he guided her. He says, "No, everything's fine. Everything's fine." And he really guided. It's an interesting story. We'll speak about her later on. But I have to mention her because Saint François de La Salle went to her a lot and asked her prayers. He truly believed in her holiness, and he asked her prayers for all the difficulties he had. And we have Saint Marguerite Bourgeois. So she arrived in 53, and she died in 1701, just before Bishop de Laval died. He died in 1708. I just gave you a few figures so that you have an idea. We're speaking about people who knew each other. Jeanne Mance, I forgot Jeanne Mance, well, 42 to 73. So Bishop de Laval dealt with Marie de l'Incarnation, with Jeanne Mance, with Catherine of St. Augustine, with Marguerite Bourgeois. He was the bishop. So we saw their lives, or most of them. And now we were bringing in the first bishop. And let's come to the second point on your paper, which is something which added to the difficulties of Bishop de Laval. The fact is, he came in 1659, which is If you think that Quebec was founded in 1608, so that's 51 years after the foundation of Quebec. So there have been people living in Quebec along the St. Lawrence River. Civilization started to develop. You have Montreal, with its extraordinary beginning. You have, as you see here, first you had the Recollets, who were the first priests. They're like Franciscans, branch of the Franciscans. In 1632, the Jesuits take over all the missions. Saint Jean de Brébeuf and all of them. And they're not all canonized. Father Vimont and so on, a number of them. But the Jesuits were the moral authority of the church. Although they were not the only one. There were other priests as well. In 1649, the Archbishop of Rouen in France. Rouen is the city of Saint Joan of Arc. It's in Normandy. The Archbishop of Rouen, through some circumstances, sent a priest in Quebec, and he began taking over the activities of the church in French Canada. So the Archbishop of Rouen started having an influence and took the responsibility, took a kind of jurisdiction over Quebec. I say a kind because we're talking about the beginning of a nation and nothing is yet formalized. It takes time. It takes time. And it will be one of the very first battles of Mgr de Laval to free Quebec from the control of the Archbishop of Rouen in France. So for about 10 years, this French Archbishop, through his Vicar General, through his priest, who was a Vicar General, but was controlling Quebec because there was no bishops in Quebec. But all of a sudden, a bishop comes and he says, I'm the bishop now. And the Archbishop of Rouen said, hold on a minute. I've been in charge of this place. And that's going to be one of the very first battle. We will see that in a moment. I'm just giving you here a bit of a historical background. And some of the battles of Bishop de Laval. So 1659, he comes not as a bishop yet, but Rome creates for the occasion a special name, a special jurisdiction called a Vicar General. He is a bishop, but there's no diocese because each diocese has a birthday. There's a day when a diocese is created. And Quebec Diocese was created in 1674, as you have it there. So Bishop de Laval was present in Quebec for 15 years, not as a bishop, but as a vicar apostolic, because Quebec was not yet a diocese. And Bishop de Laval will remain the bishop in Quebec and of Quebec until 1688. 1688, he resigns. His health is not good, although he will still live another 20 years. He resigns, and he himself appoints his successor, Bishop Jean-Baptiste de Saint-Vallier, second Bishop of Quebec, 1688-1727. before we go through his life, I would like to insist on a few points why it's good to know his life. He's the first bishop of Quebec. And as I told you, the diocese went from Quebec all the way to Louisiana, like all the way to Gaspésie. It was practically US and Canada. Practically. We have in the church a book called the Martyrology. Every morning when the priests and the nuns and the brothers, when we pray, we read the saints of the day or the next day. And it's amazing. It's the story of the martyrs. Well, actually, we mentioned the saints. Most of them are martyrs. But really an impressive number of the saints in the church calendar are bishops. Impressive. Every morning you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You hear Bishop so-and-so, Saint so-and-so, bishop. Saint so-and-so, bishop. Bishop, 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 bishop. And a number of these bishops were the first bishops of territories. You have Saint Denis, Bishop of Paris. You have Saint Augustine in Canterbury. You have Saint Irenaeus. I mentioned him this morning about the episcopal genealogy, episcopal succession. Saint Irenaeus. He is the first bishop of Lyon in France. Saint Apollinarius. If you go to Italy, so you see, well, on the east coast, you have a place, Loreto is on the east coast. You have Venice. You go down from Venice, you have a place called Ravenna. Ravenna, which was a famous city in Italy. It was once upon a time the seat of the emperor. The emperor lived in Ravenna. Well, Ravenna is famous for its mosaics. Not painting, but little mosaics, like big, like puzzles. Mosaics they put on the walls and on the ceilings, and it's exquisite. We're talking about 6th, 7th century. But you walk into this, the main city, the main church of I think Saint Apollinarius in Classe. It's a big church, like a Roman church, and you have the medallions on the walls of all the bishops of Ravenna since Saint Apollinarius, who was made a bishop by Saint Peter. So that city has had a bishop since the 1st century. And you have the genealogy all around the city. Okay, it's fantastic. So, but he was the first bishop, and a number of them are saints, these bishops, because these first men who were appointed bishops, their role was to bring the Catholic civilization in a new place. And they were truly representing the church. And we can say that the history of the church, country through countries, is the history of its bishops. It's just amazing. In Europe, you have centuries with great bishops. We have in Montreal, Mgr Bourget, in Montreal, Mgr Laflèche in Three Rivers, here, Mgr Guigues here in Ottawa, the first bishop here in 1847. But these were great men, and they realized they represented the church. We spoke today about the mission. Well, these bishops were conscious that they were sent directly by the Pope to bring in the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church, to organize a Catholic diocese. Very, very important. And that's why it's one reason why it's interesting to study Saint François de Laval, the first bishop in Canada, who's a saint. We have a bishop in Saint Hyacinthe in Montreal, Saint Hyacinthe. Bishop Moreau, the fourth bishop, he's blessed. Maybe he will be canonized one day. But it's great to have Bishop Bourget, certainly canonizable in Montreal, 1840s. We might speak about him perhaps if we have time. But it's great to have these bishops. Not only they were governing the diocese, but they were saints. An extreme life of mortification, of prayer. They were saints, real saints. And now we are living in the church. There's no doubt what I've just said. The history of the church is the history of its bishops. That applies for the 17th century, the 18th century, and it applies for today. If the church is so sick today, so weak, it's because there's a crisis of bishops. The bishops are not doing anything. Here at the elections, I don't know if you hear anything from the bishops. They're not speaking out. They're not excommunicating those who promote abortion or whatever. Okay, it should be done. So, and that's why it's good to know. And when you read, when you go to Mass or you read the lives of the saints, whenever you have a saintly pope or a saintly bishop or a saintly king, remember there was a time where the leaders in the spiritual and in the temporal, they were saints. Imagine having a president, a prime minister who would go to daily Mass, who would serve Mass. Garcia Moreno, who's certainly canonizable, he would serve Mass. He was killed on August 6, 1875. He knew his death was imminent. He came to the church next to his house, and the priest was starting Mass on a side altar. He tapped on the shoulder of the altar boy. He says, "Let me serve." So the president of the nation took the place of the altar boy. It was First Friday. It was August 6th, Transfiguration. And he says, I need to go to communion, and I need to serve Mass, to unite myself, my life to the sacrifice. So when you have leaders in the temporal and in the spiritual who are, truly saints, it's encouraging. It's easier for people to become saints, to practice the faith. So, O Lord, grant us holy bishops. Another reason why it's good to know of these saintly bishops and to know about his life, Saint François de Laval, because he became a saint. When you study his life, you might be shocked at the human level in the church then. Today we're suffering. Right now there's the Synod of Amazon, where we see that the church is infested, the church is occupied by the evil forces. But we see the human side of the church, which is not pretty. Well, it's not the first time. We will see briefly in the life of Saint François de Laval, we'll see jealousies among bishops, jealousies going very far to prevent, that's his story here. He should have been consecrated a bishop. The Archbishop of Rouen, jealous of his possession, did everything he could to stop him from going to Canada. It's the human side of the church. And it was nasty. It was nasty. So, not all the bishops and not all the priests are saints. But it's not just today. It's been like this for 2,000 years. It's interesting in the lives of Saint François de Laval also to see the battles a bishop can have with the local civil authority. Saint Francis de Laval, one of his first battles was against alcoholism, the selling of spirits to the Indians. And the French governor was against the bishop. was backing up those who were selling the spirits to the Indians. And the bishop even had to excommunicate some because it was, France was coming in. All these French people were coming in with a Catholic religion of holiness, of virtue, of beauty, and some of them were promoting alcoholism. And so that was a major impediment for the conversion of these, because people don't make a difference. I mean, are the people in France not all Catholics like you? And no. So it was hard for the priests to try to convert them when they saw even the governors and the captains in the army or high-ranked people in the civil society making money selling alcohol. It was a nasty battle. So both the fact that Saint Francis de Laval had to fight with the governors and the civil authorities, he had to fight with the local people, the local dealers. It has been found out that one of the reasons of the spreading of alcohol among the Indians was the fur trade, which was pushed by one of the French minister, Colbert, who was trying to make as much money as possible with the purchase of furs at the lowest price possible. So they were selling alcohol, inebriating the natives in order to get furs at a cheap price. And that was promoted by a minister in France who was next to Louis XIV. Okay, so Saint François de Sales had to manage the diocese, to manage his territory, dealing with that. It's interesting when you know this, because St. Francis Xavier, his namesake, 100 years before, just 120 years before, had the same problem in India. He was trying to convert the Indians, and he succeeded to a great extent. But then he found out that the Portuguese viceroy was trading pearls with the Muslims in India, who were taking the Indians as slaves to go pearl fishing in order to make money. And so St. Francis Xavier was trying to convert the people, but then the Portuguese authorities were undermining the work of the missionaries. So that's in the background and very much sometime in the foreground, but you have to understand that. And I mentioned that because the church is human and divine. And it's good to know the history of the church, because the past history of the church helps us to see that what is happening today is not the first time it happens. And it won't be the last time that it happens. Another reason, a third reason, and then we're going to go through his life. So, isn't not this the worst crisis in the history of the church? Yes, it is, because we have the Pope and the cardinals doing what they're doing. It is the worst, but it's not the first. There has been other crises. It's the worst, yes. The Arian crisis in the 4th century was also very bad. The humanist crisis in the 15th century was also very bad. So, but you must not think that before Vatican II, everybody was a saint. No, that would be swinging, that would be wrong, swinging completely the other side. It's not true. Everything was perfect, before Vatican II. St. Pius X wrote Pascendi, 60 years, 55 years before Vatican II. Pius IX wrote the syllabus 100 years before Vatican II. The French Revolution was almost 200 years before Vatican II. So it's the worst, but there have been other crises. And the history of the church is, in many ways, is a sad one. But to know that helps us to hold on to today. But my third reason why it's very interesting to study the life of Saint François de Laval is that, so he arrived in 59. I will develop that a little bit in a moment. But one of the first things he did in 63, so barely 4 years after he arrived in Quebec, was to open a seminary. To open a seminary. The Jesuits had a boys' school, a college for boys, which they founded in 35, but there was no seminary. And he says, I need to train priests right here for these people. And not only he had a seminary, we will see that in a moment, but he wanted the priests in the Quebec area to live together at the seminary. One of the big issues, St. Francis de Laval is the first one to create parishes in Canada. There were no parishes. We're talking about mission. So a parish is a territory, underneath a parish priest. There was none. The missionaries, there were some areas in Montreal and Quebec, and some priests had chapels. In Montreal, we had a chapel. We visited Notre-Dame de Bon Secours. There was different chapels. The Ursuline had their chapels, and the Hôtel Dieu in Quebec had their chapel. There was a few chapels, but there was just a few hundred people. I think in early 1660s there was maybe 2,000 people in Quebec. So in the colony, so very, very few. But Saint François de Laval created parishes, but that implies appointing a priest in charge. But we're coming to this in a moment. He wanted a priest, although they were secular priests, they're not Jesuits or Recollets or Sulpicians, he wanted them to have kind of a community life, to be together as a group. And that is exactly what St. Pius X wished for at the end of his exhortation to the priest. He says, he wrote this in 1908, he speaks about how priests need to become saints, how you become a holy priest. In the apostolate, St. Pius X says, the work of the priest is much more fruitful when the priest work as a team, as a community, when there's groups of priests. History of the church proves this, and this, what we're going to see today, is another example. When priests work as together, it's much more efficient. St. Pius X had that wish, which he knew by history. And that's exactly the wish of Archbishop Lefebvre, of the founding of the Society of St. Pius X. It's a priestly society. The full name is the Priestly Society of St. Pius X, where Archbishop Lefebvre saw in Africa, he saw as the superior of the Holy Ghost Fathers, the dangers for the priests, dangers of solitude, dangers, all kind of temptations, dangers to chastity, dangers with alcohol. Priests are men, and priests can be tired, they can be depressed, they can be alone, solitude. And So Archbishop Lefebvre saw that in Africa. He saw that in France when he came back. He's in 62. He saw that as the Holy Ghost Superior General. They had 5,000 priests. He saw the problems of priests, and he says one of the solution is that the priests be together. So it's interesting to see that great minds think alike. St. Archbishop Lefebvre, St. Pius X, many others, including St. François de Laval.